Welcome, everybody, to Va-Dor's Controversial Issues Forum, named after Rabbi Barry Silver's father, Rabbi Sam Silver, who always felt that we should discuss whether it's controversial or not controversial. We should always have communication and discussion. And with that, I will open it up to Rabbi Barry and Mike Essen for their take on this evening. Thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And I apologize for being a little bit late and being out of attire. My brother is in town, and he's a great basketball player. My team was practicing, and I was running around the basketball court, and I was getting so into it. And I said, "Oh my goodness, what time is it?" And they said, "It's 7 o'clock." So I ran home, and I apologize. But my father did believe that it was very important for us to speak to each other. And I think now that lesson is more important than ever. The country is polarized. Jews are polarized. Families aren't talking to each other. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to exchange views with those who hold different opinions. Mike and I have very, very different opinions on things, but we still like each other, we're still friends, and we still have civil discourse. So no matter what happens today, and no matter who says what in the discussion, the fact that the two of us are here chatting, starting off as friends, and hopefully ending up as friends, that is what is important. I would like to turn it over to our guest, Mike Essen, who's a renowned Republican conservative talk show host, card-carrying member of the NRA, to launch the discussion. I'd like to talk about the police violence. I'd like to talk about Black Lives Matter. And I'd like to talk about what's going on in the world today around us. And I'll turn it over to Mike to start out the discussion, and also about guns. What do we do about guns? Mike, enlighten us.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you all for being here. I am a Life Patron member of the NRA. I think Biden's executive order was sick, dictatorial, and unconstitutional. It banned semi-autos, which failed. The ban failed from 1994 to 2004, and the Clinton DOJ said that himself. It enacted red flag laws, which red flag laws mean that somebody can just accuse you of something, like the wife or husband accuses the other one of something viciously, and the other person loses their constitutional right to own guns. And we have a constitutional right to own guns. Second Amendment was not for hunting Huey, Dewey, and Louie. They are referring to a National Guard. There was no, that's what the other side says, like a militia. The people were the militia, said James Madison, and Thomas Jefferson said a free country should not go disarmed. If it was a collective right, it wouldn't be in that section of the Constitution. I think the states are fighting back. We will win, and victim disarmament is never the answer. I yield to Barry.
Michael, I'm going to do something rather unusual. Rather than spout off my opinion, I'm going to ask you. We've had mass shootings almost on a daily basis. We have Blacks being shot left and right, and you propose absolutely nothing.
Not true.
You have no proposal. All you can say is, well, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. My question to you, Mike, is, do you think there's a problem in America with guns? And if so, what is your solution?
I think the problem with the guns in the hand of the wrong people. And my solution is to put them to do something which the NRA wanted to do, enforce the laws on the books, have armed teachers, armed security, the only thing stop, and not have these, and have the nationalism back, and have tougher penalties, including a death penalty for first-degree murder. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
I have another question for you, Mike. When the person shoots 12 people and then shoots themselves, what is your tougher penalties going to do? How is that going to deal with the problem? I haven't heard anything from you.
I know you've heard a lot, and I'm telling you more. The death penalty is a deterrent, because once they are dead, because it'll stop other people from doing it. It happened in San Bernardino where guns are banned. It's happened in Australia where guns are banned. If it doesn't work, look for something else. I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying you have to enforce the laws on the books and not have recidivism out of control, and protect our Constitution. and just not do things that haven't worked before.
Which laws on the books are you referring to that are not being enforced?
Mentally ill people not being allowed to have guns.
That sounds like a red flag law to me.
Let me answer your question. You asked me a question, so I answer it. People
Okay.
not being let out of prison on loopholes. People not being let out of their cages. According to the FBI statistics, uniform FBI, 76 of 80 people who shoot people a day are let out of their cages. That's the problem. I just told you.
Okay. Well, so far, we've heard absolutely nothing to deal with the problem and no sense of alarm, because most of the mass shootings are done by people who haven't picked up a gun and had problems with the law before. A lot of these mass shootings are done by people with no prior record. So I just want to let everybody know that so far, we've heard nothing from Mike expressing any alarm, any concern, any shock, any worries about all the shooting going on. Instead, his response is, well, the best he can do is don't let people who have mental problems get a gun. Sounds like a red flag. Let me finish, Mike.
Go ahead, finish.
Let me finish.
Don't lie about what I'm saying.
Let me finish.
Go ahead.
It sounds like he's suggesting a red flag law to me. Somebody's got a mental problem, they shouldn't have a gun. That sounds like a liberal proposal to me. I hear nothing from him, and I hear nothing from the NRA. Now, let me share my point of view. The United States has a very, very serious problem. It's so serious that people get used to it and they don't even blink. They don't even think anything of another mass shooting every day. But for those of us who actually have a Jewish neshama and a Jewish soul, this violence is very bothersome. It's troubling, it's hurtful, and we have prophets who have spoken about this. Okay, the prophet Isaiah said, beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. That was a very, very radical gun control law. Before there were even guns, when the worst you could have is a sword, he wanted them wiped out. That is the Jewish ideal, and that is the Jewish goal. I'm not saying we can get there tomorrow, because there's too many lunatics with guns right now. But what we should be doing is we should make it far more difficult for anyone to get a gun. We should get rid of weapons of war. These semi-automatic weapons are shocking. They're weapons of war. And we have so many of them. In Australia, when they passed a ban, they cut down their gun violence a lot. We have hundreds of times more death and carnage in the United States. It might not bother Mike, might not bother the NRA. I don't like having to go to sleep wondering if my sons are going to survive because some maniac's going to kill them or some wacko is going to come and shoot somebody in a theater. The level of violence is outrageous. And as Bibi Netanyahu said about the Palestinian violence, the lack of outrage is the outrage. I'm outraged, and we need to do something serious to stop this problem. I'll also say this before I conclude for now. Giving access to young people of violent video games that are vicious, vile, virulent, and violent and vulgar and vituperative, and allowing them to play these games and to be raised with these games. These are training films for mass murder. They teach a child that a gun is fun, to maim is a game, killing is thrilling, and they affect the child's mind so that they think that if they have a problem, they're going to go out in a blaze of glory, take a lot of people with them, and kill somebody. These vicious, violent games don't affect every child that way, maybe 1 in a million. But if you have 100 million watching, then you get 100 crazy people out there, and it's dangerous. I see we have Dr. Dave Bolton on the line. He might want to weigh in on this about the psychological effects of exposing children, not only to watching violence, which is bad enough, but vicariously engaging in violence and getting scored on how many points they could win. Our society needs a spiritual transformation, and we need it now. Mike, I'll pass it back to you, and then we'll open it up to others.
I find it very funny you attack me and the NRA's credibility when you are the board member of an organization founded by Nazis who kills children in the womb, and you're quoting the Bible, and you're a so-called atheist rabbi who's a fraud. Who's a hypocrite now, Barry?
I never called you a hypocrite. I just suggested.
You just said I don't care about people dying. You're accusing me of being a liberal. You're accusing me of being hypocritical. I asked you a couple questions. You're not answering them.
I'll repeat again. I did not call you a hypocrite. What I said was that you're supporting policies that are dangerous, and you're not doing anything to stop the violence. That's not a hypocrite. A hypocrite is someone who says.
I think you called me, said I have no credibility. You're making me out to have no credibility. I just showed you that you have no credibility. I don't personally like being attacked like that.
Okay, well, let me respond. First of all, I didn't call you a hypocrite. A hypocrite is someone who says one thing and does another. You're very consistent. You consistently ignore violence. That's not hypocritical. That just means that you don't have a solution to the problem of violence. If you want to say, well, you attacked me, so I'm going to attack you, that's the whole problem, Mike. I thought we were above that. I didn't think
I thought you were above that. You attack me all the time. You attack me today, and I don't appreciate it.
I'm not attacking you. I'm suggesting that your point of view is flawed. So I'm not attacking you. And just because somebody says something about you that you don't like, we're not 2-year-olds. We're not in a sandbox. Oh, you called me a name. I'm going to call you a name. You're a hypocrite.
No, I'm pointing out the truth. I'm pointing out the truth.
Mike,
I'm above being a 2-year-old. Your whole congregation is based on a fraud, and you don't even admit that. Why are you quoting the Bible?
Mike? What's the fraud, Mike?
You don't believe in the Bible and you're quoting it. You're an atheist rabbi. That's like being in the Hall of Fame playing baseball and never playing baseball. I think it's you who bullies every guest on my show. You're attacking me for being callous, attacking me for being immature, when all you do is attack people, attack their ideas.
Well, let me respond to that and then open it up. I thought we were going to have a pleasant, intellectual
I thought so too.
conversation. And I don't want to get into side issues. However, I have noticed that when people say things that aren't true and you don't respond, others tend to believe it's true. So let me express my view about the Bible. My view of the Bible is similar to the Reform movement, the Reconstructionist movement, the Humanist movement, the Jewish Renewal movement. And that view is that the Bible was inspired by ideals that motivated our people, but it was not written by a divine, infallible being. We believe that because in the Bible, there's genocide and death penalties for women who aren't virgins upon marriage and all types of other atrocities. So it's not me that you're attacking. What you're suggesting is the entire Reform Reconstructionist movement is invalid. It makes more sense to believe that people...
Reform. Don't lie about me. Don't lie like that. The Reconstructionist means you're an atheist. Reform does not mean you're an atheist. You're a liar. You have a pathetic laugh too. I'm getting the hell out of here.
Let me just respond to that, and then we'll open it up, because I don't like when things are said that are not true and I don't get a chance to respond. I do believe that our ancestors, Jewish ancestors, were worshiping a divine creative power responsible for everything in the universe. I believe in such a power. I believe there is a creative power in us, in the universe, in the world, and I stand in awe of it. And I celebrate that power that was felt by our ancestors. Through science, we understand the power a little more. So we know that there's not some guy who's giving us a disease when we get sick. We've heard of the germ theory. So we attribute disease not to an angry God, but rather to germs. We know that there's plate tectonics. So when there's an earthquake, we don't think God got angry at us. Modern Jews think that that means that there's some cracks in the earth. So we have a view of God. My view is really based on Spinoza and Einstein and Heschel and my father. It's a view that's a little different than the Bible. We don't believe in a personal God, but we do believe that there's a creative force, and that this creative force transforms what is into what could be. And Judaism helps us to channel that creative power into what should be. I'd like to now open it up to others to share their point of view. Sharon, open up the floor to others, please.
Hello, Barry.
Yes.
Hello, Barry. Joe, I want to surprise you on some things. I agree with you on the bringing up the children with the videos and all the violence. As a parent, we try to control what our kids see, but again, it's very hard with the electronics of today. But yeah, they're being trained to be serial killers or violence and stuff. And you see an increase in crime, including mass shootings on people that are 18 to 23, 24 in that area. Now, we differ a little bit on that. One of the biggest problems over the last few weeks on the mass shootings, every one of them had mental health issues. We have to focus on mental health, and we can work on that. There's many wide range of symptoms of mental health, which a lot of people don't understand. And that's a major cause of our problems here. As far as gun violence, yeah, I'm outraged. I'm a law enforcement, I'm outraged. We take our lives every day by going out there and protect and serve the community. The problem is not the law-abiding citizens, it's the criminals that don't follow the laws, that get a hold of weapons, and no matter how many laws we put on the books, they will always get a weapon of their choice because by definition, they don't follow the law. What we need to focus on is education, reuniting family entities to reunite the families, bring back moral compass, and also get rid of anything that's with violence in it. In other words, bring back the Leave It to Beaver days, basically. We need to show family entities, and we need to get rid of the heat in this country across the board. It doesn't matter which side you're in. And if we could do that and work together, we can actually keep the Constitution and save lives at the same time.
Joe, I do appreciate your having an intelligent response to what I've been saying. As far as mental health, you're right. Obviously, the gun is not the only problem. People who are mentally healthy are not the problem. But if it's a toxic brew. You have violent video games, you have people with mental health issues, and then you have access to guns, and then you have a society with breakdowns. It's going to cause problems. We don't have more mental health issues in the United States than they do in other countries, but we have hundreds of times more death. Why? Because we have hundreds of times more weapons. The mental health issue is the same. The Republicans tend to want to spend less with mental health than the Democrats do, but there's not going to come a day, Joe, when everybody is mentally healthy. That day is not coming. So what we have to do is recognize that there's going to be mentally ill people and make sure they don't get guns. In our society, mentally ill people, everybody can get a gun very easily. And so if we do nothing, we're going to have mass shootings every day. The carnage has to stop. Who else would like to weigh in on this?
I actually agree with you.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. Anybody else want to share a point of view? And Joe, I just want to say this. I agree with you about the police. The police should have arms, and they should not have to go into a situation where every time they go into a place, they're outgunned and outmanned wherever they go. It's dangerous for police. I know a lot of police officers who are not too thrilled with our lax gun control laws and are nervous that they have to place themselves in violent situations with very violent people. Let's get somebody else involved. Who else wants to speak on the issue?
Go ahead,
Dave
Raylene.
Bolton. Dr. Bolton.
Go ahead, Raylene. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Dr. Bolton, go ahead. David, unmute yourself first.
Okay. I certainly don't propose to have any answers to a multifaceted problem, with many, we've identified there's many factors to the problem, but just a couple of thoughts. I mean, first of all, obviously, we have decline in family values and moral values around the world. I don't know if it's worse in America, but that's the problem, because ultimately you can't legislate morality. I mean, you can try, but that, you throw someone in jail after they do wrong. But to create a better society, we've lost that. It takes a village to raise a child. I think as people are more alienated, social media is not social. People have boyfriends and girlfriends by texting on the internet. People don't have live conversation. Families don't eat together. So I don't think there's any simple solution, but I think it's certainly a decline in values just causes all sorts of problems, violence being one of them. With the violent video games, it's ridiculous. It's training you to be desensitized to violence. I'm civil libertarians. I mean, I think they shouldn't be around. Should they be made illegal? I don't know. I'd like, I guess the companies don't self-censor themselves. And I'm not, in favor of violence, of course. But this is known statistically. You can't predict violence for for all the hundreds of millions of kids who do violent video games. Not everyone does a mass shooting, but obviously, those who do, I believe in some cases were influenced by that. No, I'd like to see no violent video games. How does that edify anyone? Should it be by law illegal or social pressure? I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm naive to think big profiteering, companies care about social pressure as long as they're making money. This is a tidbit. I wasn't prepared to be scientific and statistical in my little talk today because I didn't know I was going to talk until I just noticed the video a few minutes ago. So with regard to there not being any simple solutions to complex problems, I read someplace pretty recently that I think, and I wish I had the quote in front of me, I think the vast majority of murders are done by knives, because I guess even more people have access to a knife, and as a moment of impulse, and a knife you can have in your pocket, a big assault rifle, people might see you, walking with. So I just point out the difficulty going back to the Isaiah, beat swords in the plowshares. I mean, if you're going to try to go to the source of every potential, you should make knives illegal. Because I wish I could give you the quote now, but more people are killed by stabbings than even by guns. So I'm just pointing out it's very difficult to have solutions for violence. One thing that's kind of a personal outrage of mine, and really hasn't hit the papers, but I know from personal reasons. So after Stoneman Douglas, everyone goes, "Oh my gosh, we need more mental health in the school." This has been discussed ad infinitum, but ostensibly everyone knew the kid was weird and had problems and was angry and violent, and no one really outed him or no one followed through. And if only people were more involved, maybe the Parkland shootings wouldn't have happened. So everyone says, "Oh, we need more, psychology in the schools." Well, this didn't make any headlines. Most people would know about this, but I'm pretty outraged as everyone's saying we need more psychology in the school. Palm Beach County School Board in August had a 6-person clinical school psychologist internship. Then they reduced it to 2. Then they eliminated it. And because it's an intern, this is cheap labor. You're getting a doctor for $20,000 a year, less than a bachelor's teacher. And they eliminated it entirely. Now, you didn't read about that in the papers because that's only those who pay attention to stuff. So this joke about we're going to, they'll spend so much money on stuff that I don't want to name names. That's, the courthouse is hundreds of millions of dollars, so all the people in high places have a lavish place to march around. But they eliminated school psychology internship completely in Palm Beach County, as we're saying we need more psychology and awareness in the schools. It's just absurd. Probably no one knew that, right?
David, I got a solution for you for part of it with the Marjorie Douglas, Stoneman Douglas.
Yeah.
Okay, Nicholas Cruz was able to get through because of a thing called the Promise Program. Under the Promise Program, what they did was take a felony and lower it down to a misdemeanor, try and keep the numbers down in crime from train ride. They were calling it to eliminate the train ride from school to prison. So they lowered the felonies. By doing that, they made sure that Nicholas Cruz wasn't spotted, basically, and in the troubles, so they couldn't get professional help in there. By doing that, they never gave him the database on the computer system, so he was able to get the gun. We just got today, one of the architects of the Promise Program was arrested for perjury and in an ongoing case in the grand jury up in Tallahassee, and Robert Runcie. I went and faced him back in October of 2018 when he actually spoke at Breck. And I told him about, I went after him on the Promise Program, telling him he had blood on his hands because he was the architect with it, along with Arnie Duncan and others. And at the same time, he didn't flinch on that, but he did flinch when I mentioned we wanted an independent audit on the monies that are missing in Broward County schools. There was millions and millions of dollars, and the grand jury. I lobbied, we got that. He's indicted, he's going to prison, and this is where we're going on. And so has most of the school board. Now, as far as Palm Beach County, you're 100% correct. We need psychiatrists and psychologists in the schools to help these troubled kids. Special needs kids If you don't take care of them at a young age, there'll be problems later. We need to take care of them. We can prevent the violence if we start and catch them early. And that's the thing.
Emily, go
No,
ahead.
wait, Emily, because
Raylene.
Raylene's been very patient and she's had her hand up for a long time. Unmute yourself, Raylene.
It was suggested earlier that they should arm teachers, arm people. Everybody should be armed. I don't think that's the answer. I think there'll be more violence, more murders, more accidents. So that is not the answer. I don't know.
I agree with whoever she is. I thought I turned it off.
Emily, go ahead.
Okay, in today's Palm Beach Post, there was an article about a man who was involved in a domestic dispute and shot his partner in a car and then shot himself, leaving a toddler in the car. And the Post cited the background of this man. He had been arrested in the past for all kinds of violence, outside a bar, shooting someone, and each time was exonerated, sometimes on a technicality, sometimes he just was exonerated from it. Now, this was obviously a person with some violent impulses. How is a person like that not incarcerated and left to commit 2 shootings? I just wanted to say that it's not necessarily always the fault of educators or psychologists. It's often the fault of the justice system that is not firm enough for some of these people.
Myrna, go ahead.
Myrna, did you want to speak?
No, I just got on. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
David.
Dr. Bolson.
Well, I'm sorry, the police officer, I forgot his name. Very interesting. I did not know that about that Nicholas Cruz was in some special program. So I will just say this, where he was, tread lightly on or not marked, for the problems he had. So as a psychologist, as a father, as a citizen, our biggest problem is no one is held accountable. I mean, people are just not held accountable. Oh, I did something terrible. It's not my fault. I mean, I'm a psychologist. I'm a compassionate guy. But as part of my compassion, I always tell people, if you got issues, you in being aware of them, you need to act better, not worse. And we have a society that it just lets people act out and say, well, it's not their fault. They had an issue. I mean, if they have an issue, treat them, but you still have to be held accountable. So that's outrageous if Nicholas Cruz was passed under the radar in some political correctness thing, to others' detriment. And respond to the last woman. I was saying earlier, you can't predict all violence, unfortunately. Like, I'm saying, well, do you ban all knives? I mean, 200 million people don't hurt people with knives and 50,000 people kill people with knives, so ban knives. I mean, you should ban fists. Some people beat other people to death. I don't have any easy answer, but what I am saying is when people have been identified and then we're not following through, it's ridiculous. You may call me conservative, but there's no war on drugs. I'm not down with the state legalizing medical marijuana. I mean, everyone just wants to have less and less standards. I mean, marijuana doesn't cure disease; it makes people feel better. Okay, so when we have, so there's no war on drugs. I mean, the rich cocaine dealers get off by, generally speaking, by paying off, with fancy lawyers. No offense to Barry, et cetera, et cetera. So we just don't hold people accountable for violence, for bad actions. So there's no easy cure, but when people are held accountable early on, because some of these violent cases, people were identified, and as the woman pointed out, they're let off. So we have to hold people accountable for our actions, and our society doesn't over and over, and it makes me sick.
Yeah, I want to respond to Dr. Bolson, because one of the reasons why we have these discussions is to try to get past this dichotomy of liberal and conservative. I think the labels are very hurtful and they don't aid discussion at all. So someone identifies as liberal and sometimes they think they have to follow a certain ideology rather than follow logic and reason. In these discussions, we don't pay attention to liberal or conservative or Democrat or Republican. We try to use logic. And what Dr. Bolson is saying, I agree with. I mean, I agree with the progressive point of view on many things and many things I don't. But holding people accountable is definitely something that we need to do and we don't do enough of. The case about the Parkland shooting. The Parkland shooting shows the breakdown in society on so many different levels. First of all, when the shooting happened, do you know that like so many people from the school said, "Oh, we're not surprised. We expected that to happen. This kid,
Yeah.
we knew something was going to happen. He had been in trouble with the police so many times and had so many issues. Nobody thought to go to the parents and say, hey, you know what? You might want to take the guns out of your home. Nobody even thought to do that, nor did they. This kid, who was a ticking time bomb, they knew he was dangerous, had guns. And the police were burying the information so nobody would find out. There was a police officer in the school. He went and hid while the school shooting was going on. The students in the school, you know, they say, see something, say something. Students in the school should have gone to him and tried to reach out and try to help him. And if he couldn't be helped, they should have gone to the authorities and say, this guy's dangerous, but nobody did. This happens over and over and over again. Most of us are not worried or have sleepless nights over a knife attack. When somebody attacks with a knife, they might take out one person. The mass shootings has put a fear and terror into all of us. And it is true that the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is not a right, it's an illusion, as long as all of that can be taken away in an instant by a maniac with a gun. And I repeat, as a rabbi, you could say, oh, you're not really a rabbi. You don't believe in some mythological being out there who's telling us what to do. As a rabbi, I believe in Jewish ideals and values. And I believe the motto of Israel, if you will it, it's no dream. And I believe that the dream of removing guns from society and only having guns in the hands of police and people who need them is not a dream. We can actually make it a reality. I'll tell you now, I don't like guns. I think they're vile. They're the original sin of America. They were used to commit genocide against Native Americans, almost wipe out the buffalo, settle scores in the West. They're a scourge. And the more guns we have, obviously, the more violence. And our goal should be to reduce the amount of weapons and guns. And therefore, if we did, we'd reduce the violence. The other countries, they don't have the level of guns that we do. They don't have anywhere near the violence. The proof is in the pudding.
Rabbi,
Anyone else want to share some thoughts?
Rabbi, what would you do to solve the problem in Chicago when more blacks were killed by other blacks in Chicago that were killed if you combine Afghanistan and Iraq together? Same thing in Baltimore. Same thing in Los Angeles. Same thing in Newark, New Jersey, and elsewhere. These things been going on way before the so-called mass shootings that are happening right now. It's been going on for years, especially in Chicago. I had on my radio show a few years back where we had the gangs, one of the school board members and one of the officials of Chicago mayor's office on our radio show for 2 hours discussing it. And they said it's not the citizens of Chicago, it's the gangs, it's the other stuff that's coming in from elsewhere. And they called at that time the Crips and the Bloods and all those things. Now we call MS-13 and others. But the solution there is nowhere to be found because they have the toughest gun control laws in the country. And yet this black crime has been going on. Thousands of kids, especially kids in Chicago, are killed, and not a word from the Democrats, not a word from BLM, anything. They only, if it doesn't fit their talking points, they're nowhere to be found. But we had on our radio show several times, and my friends that were sheriffs and law enforcement in there are overwhelmed. They can't stop it, and their hands are tied because they don't want to express, because their mayor, who's a Democrat, is controlling that and is controlling the message out.
And Joe, let me respond to what you're saying, because
how are you going to survive that?
if you were to read my Jewish Journal article, in a Jewish journal right now, you will hear me speaking your talking points. I agree with you. We have to hold Black society accountable for what's going on, because there are far, far more Blacks who are killed by other Blacks than the police. It's not even close. Now, I propose the solution to the shooting of Black youth is twofold. One, there are some bad apples in the police, and they're covered up by other police. Most of the law enforcement officers are good. The problem is, if there's a bad one, then the results are lethal. There's too many officers who are violent, too many officers who want to push their weight around and their power around, too many of them who have no business being police officers, and they don't do any favors to the other officers who are good police officers. They shouldn't be hired, and when they show violence, they should be terminated. This guy who killed this Chauvin had 18 complaints, and it only resulted in one reprimand. 18 complaints for aggression and violence. He has no business having a badge. And this, we shouldn't entrust a badge and a gun to people who are violent prone. On the other hand, the Black community should stop insisting that all of their problems are because of slavery from hundreds of years ago or racist cops. That's nonsense. The Jewish people have been oppressed and subjected to all types of horrors.
I agree.
They don't go around shooting each other and doing horrible things. The Black community has to look in their own society, in their backyard. Are there drugs? Is there a lack of education? Are there children being born out of wedlock? Are there influences in their society that are harmful? It doesn't do them any favors to ignore all of these things and to pretend that all of their problems are because of white society. And I'm tired of listening to liberal radio or TV and never hearing a word about it. In my article, I said this: the conservatives should not pay attention to Fox. The Fox is a deceiver, and a TV station that denies climate change is not worth listening to. MSNBC starts with the truth, because MS is the truth in Yiddish, but it ends with NBC, which I think stands for no Black culpability. They will never, ever blame Black society for anything. And I will. And I'll say also that Al Sharpton, on the day before the trial, when the trial was going to start, he gets up there and he says, if they don't find Chauvin to be guilty, that means there's no justice in America. What he's saying is, if the verdict doesn't go our way, let's loot and pillage and burn down. Black Lives Matter is a horror. And the problem of violence by police is not helped by having a racist group that doesn't like whites and is anti-Semitic and has things anti-Israel. That is not the group that should be leading the charge. And Jews should speak out about that organization. They are not helping the Black community. In this community, just 1 minute, Dr. Bolton. In this community, we had a shooting of a Black youth by a police officer, Corey Jones. I worked with the family, and we didn't call in Black Lives Matter. There was no looting, no violence, no mayhem. There was just discussion and reform, and the officer was found guilty. That's what should happen. I believe that Black Lives Matter, BLM, stands for burning, looting, and mayhem. And we don't need them trying to deal with this problem and capitalizing on it. All right, Dr. Bolton, go right ahead.
Well, you might know this. Do you remember how Al Sharpton first came to national prominence?
Yeah, I know.
I'm from Poughkeepsie, New York. In Wappingers Falls, Tawana Brawley said 3 white lawyers raped her and wrote the N-word all over her body. Sharpton came in charging some outrage, blah, blah, blah. It turned out not to be true. He didn't apologize after. Well, I still have a point. So it's the same thing. When you have agenda, you're not looking at the facts case by case. He became famous on a lie and vilified people. And I'm not saying obviously bad things don't happen, but the case that made him famous was a falsehood. And he didn't apologize for saying all the, the anti, people things he did, because that he started on a lie. So anytime, I agree with you about the whole thing of liberal conservative. I'm just strategic analyst. There's a problem. Let's get the facts and see what would help the situation. Anytime someone has an agenda, they're biased, and bias makes you stupid because you pre-decided the answer. You're not looking at the data. You don't do that in science. You shouldn't do it in psychology. You shouldn't do it in politics. But politically correct means you've pre-decided an answer to a problem. So that is a huge problem.
Thanks, Dr. Bolton. There was another guy who got involved with politics on a lie, claiming that 3 Black youth killed a jogger and took out an ad in the New York Times and saying that our president wasn't born in the United States, and he became famous too. So this is a problem when people base their credibility on lies and the general public doesn't hold them to account. Anybody else want to join in the discussion?
Go ahead, Deborah and Ruth.
Okay, so I have, am I still muted? No, I'm good.
No, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to know, since Barry, like you were talking about logic, you know, we all have to think logically and stuff like this. Well, logically, you know, people, 97% of the people in this country would like background checks, but we can't get it done. So where's all the logic? They're just, everybody's being owned by money these days. So how do we overcome this? Because I mean, 90-some% of the people in this country would be okay with something like background checks and they still can't get it passed. So I'm just curious on your take on that.
That's a very, very good point. The solution is very simple. Just do a background check of the politicians. And if they take money from the NRA, toss them out of office, because the NRA is the one who's doing that and waging this. It's absolutely ridiculous that we can't have background checks for gun ownership. And by the way, a militia, the Second Amendment is only mentioned in terms of a militia. It never says anywhere that anyone has the right to own a gun except for a militia. As far as I know, there are no more militias. The Second Amendment was written at the time of the Shays Rebellion, when the federal government didn't have an army to put it down. And so they had to rely on the states to suppress rebellion. And so they said, in order to have a militia, you should have the right to own a gun. But there was never a right to own a gun outside of a militia. A gun was able to be owned for a militia's purpose, but not a malicious purpose. And so people don't understand the Second Amendment, and they take it to extremes. But yes, we should have background checks. And this problem with the NRA is not just on gun control. Every issue you can think of is corrupted by money buying off politicians, to the point that we now have the best government that money can buy. And we no longer hold elections, we hold auctions that go to the highest bidder. So thank you for your comment.
Sandy, do you want to unmute and say something?
Oh, there's tons to say, Sharon. Actually, first of all, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Sandy Lopater. I am the president of our synagogue, Congregation Va-Dor. I am a school teacher in the school district of Palm Beach County, and I am a retired police officer. I got to work backwards, I guess. Barry and I once had a debate about this very topic. And one of the things I brought up in debate is something that Barry mentioned tonight, and he's 100% correct. I presented the crowd with a whole bunch of gun-type toys. And I looked at the crowd and I said, the reason why there is such violence in this country stems from the fact that we bought our kids toy guns and taught them how to play army when they were very young. So I agree with Barry. And now we have video games in terms of, if I just reset my computer, the characters are alive again. So we've lost this ability to understand the finality of actually using a gun. But let me go to some other things we discussed. I disagreed with Barry then, and I disagree with Barry now about the Second Amendment. And I point out to him that there's a very, very important comma in between the concept of militia and the right of the people. As a matter of fact, in 2008, the Supreme Court ruled in Heller versus the District of Columbia that the Second Amendment does allow the citizens to keep and bear arms, and ordered Washington, D.C. to allow Heller to be able to get a weapons permit. If you take a look at the writings of our founding fathers outside of the Second Amendment, they all talk about the need for the citizenry to own weapons, and they did, especially in protection of their farms. Of course, they didn't envision the type of weapons we have today. And I'm a firm believer that no one has an actual need, no civilian has an actual need to own an AR-15 or other military replica weapon. It's just I can't see the concept, and I've owned every one of them. I still own guns. I carry a gun all the time. There was a question about blacks being killed more than whites by law enforcement. Categorically untrue. 2017, 457 whites to 223 blacks. 2018, 399 whites to 209 blacks. 2019, 370 to 235 blacks. 2020, 457 whites to 241 blacks. And currently in 2021, this is nationwide, 50 whites to 30 blacks. Please understand, I am not condoning, and I am horrified at the gun violence that occurs. The shooting at the FedEx facility where the guy had 2 AR-15s, he was red flagged, but it was a temporary order, as most red flags are. And he went out and legally bought 2 AR-15s and committed the shooting. We have red flag laws in the state of Florida, and they are used a lot. We also have background checks in the state of Florida.
Right.
You cannot buy a firearm in the state of Florida through a dealer, and I'm focusing on that comment, through a dealer without having an immediate background check done by computer. And in this county, there's a 5-day waiting period from the time you purchase a gun to the time that you're allowed to pick it up. That's just this county. There was a comment made about teachers armed at schools. In this county, in Broward County, in Dade County, they will never, ever do it. They all have their own school police, and every school in this county has at least one police officer on campus at all times. At my school, there are 2. I teach at John I. Leonard in Green Acres. There are counties in the north and in the west part of Florida that have, in fact, armed their teachers. The Guardian program is very, very specific, though. And in fact, the training program, the actual firearms portion of the Guardian program is more intensive than what law enforcement gets at Police Academy in the state of Florida. It's more hours, it's more shooting. All this means nothing to the families who have lost people. There is a systemic problem, not racism, but people who shouldn't be carrying guns on both sides of the badge. I disagree with the notion that we can end gun violence by getting rid of all guns, because you're never going to get rid of all guns. As was said earlier by I believe, Mr. Goldner, the bad guys don't follow the rules. And so every law-abiding citizen could be contacted by the government and say, turn in your guns, and they would do it, or by definition, immediately, they would become criminals. But not every criminal is going to say, oh, they made a law, I'm going to turn in my guns. It's a very, very large problem. It's heinous. I agree with everything Barry said about Black Lives Matter. I have absolutely no respect for the organization whatsoever. I don't have an organization that promotes more violence because of violence. And I'm appalled at the comments that our president and Maxine Waters said prior to the verdict that was given in the George Floyd case. And now already you had a shooting in Columbus, Ohio yesterday by law enforcement. And the news, some of the news places like NPR and others have already had to change their story because they originally reported that the girl didn't have a knife, when the webcam video clearly shows she was moving her arm downward to stick a knife in some girl's chest. We have a problem on all sides of the fence. We have to look at what I consider to be the problems that bring people to say, this is the best answer I got. I'm going to shoot, I'm going to stab, I'm going to drive a car on a sidewalk and run over a New York judge. I'm going to fly a plane into buildings. That's where we have to start. What is going on in society that is causing people to be so angry that they have to kill? I agree with the mental health. We really don't handle it well. I have no problem with background checks. I have no problem with having a license to own a gun. Different from the permit that I own that allows me to carry concealed, but an actual license, like a driver's license that says I went through a course of training and I'm able to carry a gun. And if not, I cross that fence and I become the criminal. But we're never gonna, in this country, and even in Australia, which has really done a great job of eradicating gun violence, they still have gun violence. It's just so much less than ours because most of the people legally turned in their guns, but they still have gun violence.
Let me respond to what Sandy said. I'm glad to see that we agree on certain things. I'm not suggesting that we're going to eliminate gun violence. The point is to try to reduce it so we don't have mass shootings every day and walking around in fear. We should do policies that are going to help reduce the level of violence. And I'm glad that we do agree on certain things. But let me just take a moment to reflect on some other things. The statistics that he's citing are correct in that, yes, there are more white people being killed than black, but as if you look at the percentage of the population, the number of blacks that are killed by police are far, far higher than the whatever it is, the 10% of their population. But then on the other hand, if you look at who's causing the violent crimes, the number of blacks who are involved in violent crimes at confrontations with the police is way higher percentage-wise than the whites. So it's back and forth. But we do have to recognize institutionalized racism, which is not a problem every single time something happens, but there are vestiges of it that we need to try to deal with. Let me talk about the comma. Now Sandy says, well, there's a comma in the Second Amendment, talking about between the militia and the rest of it. I'm more concerned about human life than a comma. I'm more concerned about someone who's in a coma than a comma. If there's a comma and the sentence has militia in it and owning a gun in it, that's close enough for me to say that there shouldn't be any ownership of guns unless you're in a militia according to the Second Amendment. If you want to say you have a right to own a gun, try looking somewhere else that's not nearly as ambiguous. Because if the founders wanted it to be that way, they would have just written clear cut without saying anything about a militia, you have a right to own a gun, period. It doesn't say it. And I think as a rabbi and as a Jew, I'm going to bend over backwards to find the definition that's going to promote trying to have a peaceful society, not to come up with a far-fetched one that's going to cause more of it. As far as the Heller decision goes, for most of the history of the United States, and for the time period closest to the time that the Constitution was written, the Second Amendment was always interpreted to mean that owning a gun was always in connection with a militia. All the Heller decision means is that today we appoint judges based on their beliefs and we stack the court so that we put people in who are going to say anything they want. And this is a very serious matter to have courts that are selected by politicians. This is a scary thing. I think that we need to bend over backwards to create a society without so many guns, and then we'll be safer.
Barry, Second Amendment, and I quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the quote for the Second Amendment.
Right, and so there's no independent right to own a gun. And by the way, what Sandy said is correct. They wanted people to own guns. Do you know why? The government wanted people to own guns so that they could put down a rebellion and slaughter Indians, because they were having problems because they were confiscating the land of the Indians and moving across the country, and they were subjected to Indian attack, and they wanted people to be able to own a gun so they could slaughter Indians. This is a shameful past.
I have to solely agree with your time frame, Barry. You're right. They did use guns to massacre our Native Americans. But we're talking about the Second Amendment, which was ratified in 1781. There wasn't any westward expansion yet.
Exactly.
13 colonies.
You're wrong. You're wrong. In 1781, they were slaughtering Indians all over the place. There was incursions. There was fighting with the Indians in 1781. It was the beginning of the end for the Indians in New England and Georgia and Southeast United States. It was going on from the time of Columbus all the way through to the late 1800s.
The founding fathers, if you read like the 5,000 year leap and the real George Washington and anything on Benjamin Franklin and others. The founding fathers' intent for the Second Amendment was solely to protect the First Amendment and the Constitution and to prevent tyrannical government. The idea was in this great experiment of a republic, not a democracy, but a constitutional republic, to have the citizens of this country that's just been born to protect themselves against another Great Britain or some other things that happened at that time. They did not want, they saw the future of a possible big time federal government or a tyrannical government, and they did the checks and balances. And one of the checks and balances was the Second Amendment to prevent a tyrannical government to take over. So as quoting George Kaufman of all people, if ballots don't work, bullets will, that theory was because of the Second Amendment taking the First Amendment. And that was the founding principles and ideas coming out of the minds and words of our founding fathers. And you can read it, Thomas Jefferson, and you can read it on Ben Franklin and others. It's all in writing. And everybody's been trying to spin it to take away that idea and say it's only for the militia. I debated Chris Hahn on this, who was on my radio show out of Fox News that came on my show. And we had a nice little debate for an hour and change. Look, the Second Amendment, we have plenty of constitutions that I could give out. Certifies that it protects the country, the Constitution. That's why they put it in there. Had nothing to do at 1700s of killing Indians. Had everything to do to protect the Constitution and the country they just formed. And that's what that was.
With all due respect, Joe, and I do agree with some of what you're saying, to suggest that in 1781, there were no issues going on with Native Americans and that the slaughter had ended is incredibly naive. And it is a complete misrepresentation of what was going on in 1781. George Washington was talking about the slaughter and saying that the United States would be judged by the slaughter. It was going on in 1781 in full force. America was moving out in Georgia and South Carolina and all over the place. There was slaughter of Indians and Indians attacking the whites to try to get their land back. I'll grant you this. There was a thought that if people were armed, it would help them against tyranny. But it was also said by the founding fathers they needed arms for to deal with rebellion and to deal with the Native American problem. That was definitely in there. But to suggest that the United States should be subjected to this mass slaughter every day, and that we should live in a war zone every day because of an amendment that is not independent of a militia, saying in the same sentence owning guns and a militia. If that's your thin reed to defend this carnage, that is a really horrible reason to allow the carnage to go on. And I'll tell you again.
The root cause of carnage that we need to focus on. A lot of it has to do with mental health. A lot of it has to do that they're not focusing on situations like black and black crime, situations where the people, the judicial system allowing out people out for no reason at all.
Hey, Joe, when is it that you think the United States is going to have no more mental health issues? It is preposterous. Let me finish. It is preposterous, ludicrous to suggest that the whole problem is mental health issues and not the gun. The problem is there is mental health issues in every society, including America, but only in America do you have mental health issues combined with guns. And in the, Sharon, can you allow me to speak? This is not proper. I understand, Joe, that you have a radio show and you want to get the last word, but I'm gonna be able to speak on my own program, on my own show, at my own synagogue. And I'm going to tell you that this nonsense about mental health is ridiculous, and I'm tired of it. There's no more mental health issue in the United States than any other country. Of course, there's mental health issues, and the Republican Party is trying to cut back money that would be used to deal with it. But we're always going to have mental health issues. We know that. The question is, are we going to have a society where the mentally ill and the deranged are able to have access to guns, Or are we going to have a society where certain people are going to say, I don't care about the guns, it's the mental health issues, as if we're ever going to get rid of mental health issues? That is a red herring. And I'm tired of living in carnage. I'm tired of all of this death and destruction. And I don't hear anything coming from these Second Amendment people about how to deal with it. And the way to deal with it is reduce guns and reduce violence.
Can I
Anybody else
respond?
want to weigh in?
Can I respond for that for a second?
Go right ahead.
Okay. First of all, guns don't fire by themselves. So if you punish the gun, that's symbolism of a substance. What you want to do is to concentrate on the person behind the gun. And it's not just mental health issues, it's criminals by definition not following the law anyway. So what are you going to do? You get tougher on the laws. You get the Justice Department, the judges, judicial system to be more tougher on crime and not let people out, like the young lady said that was out a couple times and ended up killing people. Look, we have down here in South Florida, Broward County and Palm Beach County and Miami-Dade County, we have a judicial system that is so corrupt, that's so lenient and so wussy that a lot of criminals and thugs are outside doing their havoc. We have a woman that killed a person in 2004 out on the street selling crack cocaine to people and abusing mentally ill or people with disabilities. We have a woman that's out there making false police reports, causing threats and stealing money in banks out there. We have people like Nicholas Cruz, because of the Promise Program and the judicial system, was able to get a gun, and because they couldn't put that person on the computer system because of the Promise Program, because you have politicians and people that sheriff like Scott Israel and others.
Joe, okay, Joe, we get it. We get it. There's a lot of crime in America. We got it. Okay, I'll give you one minute to tell us what your solution is, because so far I've heard nothing about solutions.
You want
to lock up everybody in the country? Fine.
Okay, no. Let me give you a solution. One, I agree with the one that's the person that was an officer. I agree with it. Basically, I agree with a universal background check. Okay, I agree with that. We need to make sure that there's a background check with an ID, like a driver's license. I agree with that to get that. Number two is anyone who has mental health issues should not get a gun. If it's a red flag law, so be it. As an officer, someone in law enforcement, we have to do that. It's very hard for officers to respond to mental health situations because they react differently, and a lot of the officers don't know how to handle that. We need training in that. Number three is we need to strengthen our laws when it comes to repeat offenders. And number four is to rein in this liberal left-wing judges that are very soft on sentencing on criminals. We need to keep them in. We also need to eliminate the gangs that's coming in this country, the drugs and the gangs and the guns that's coming in this country. Secure the border better. Even Biden's now trying to do that. And we got other things going on, but we plus programs and try and get into the communities and work in the neighborhoods to work with the families and people with troubled individuals, such as Chuck Norris's farm program, extend the Boys and Girls Club and others. We could do a lot of ways. We, as in law enforcement, can work in the community to reduce the crimes and work in the families. But we need to have
thanks for your time. Anybody else want to speak?
Go ahead, Deborah. And then David.
Okay, I have a question for Sandy, if you don't mind, since you
Go
brought
right
up.
ahead.
Okay, the AR-15, and maybe you can give me some clarity, because I'm not a gun person, and I just don't get why there's so much backlash to even get rid of these AR-15s off the street. Can you maybe give some clarity to that?
I think the answer really boils down to the NRA and the Second Amendment, honestly. And the NRA would be very pissed off at me for saying that. But
That's what I figured it was, but
Yeah.
it's good to hear it from somebody else, because that to me, I mean, I feel like if those are out on the streets, then our cops should have them. I mean, they're like, it's just crazy to me.
so it's been a proven fact that for the most part, cops are outgunned. And that has to do with budgets from municipalities that don't want to spend the money. Most every police officer in his car has at minimum a shotgun. I carried an urban rifle in my police car in addition to a shotgun. The sheriff's office, they all do have AR-15s.
Right.
The reality of the AR-15 though, is that it is not a fully automatic weapon unless it's illegally modified by somebody.
Correct.
Only the military have fully automatic AR-15s. So as fast as someone can pull a trigger and reload a magazine is as fast as it can be shot. You take the case of the shooting in Las Vegas over the concert, he had multiple weapons already fully loaded in his reach. He got done with one, he just picked up another one. But I'm trained to be able to replace a magazine in under 1 second if I'm shooting. I agree with a lot of what Joseph said in terms of the fix. The problem with these gun laws, and again, I have no problem with banning the AR-15 because I don't believe that John Q. Public should have it. But it didn't reduce violence in the 10 years that it was enacted before. AR-15s were banned for 10 years during, I believe, the Clinton administration. But it didn't work. Still had violence. But again, like I said, military replica weapons that carry a magazine of 30 bullets at a time, not the 100 that Joe Biden thinks it does, there's just no reason for it. But I can do the same damage with my handgun that an AR-15 can do in the same amount of time.
Because you're trained, but a lot of these people, you know, they're not, they're just, you know what I mean? They're buying these guns to go out to kill.
Here's the problem with that. And this was proven emphatically in the FedEx case. You don't need to be a good shot. If you're holding a gun and you're pulling the trigger multiple times real fast and moving the gun around in an arc, you're going to hit something. You're guaranteed to. And the same thing with the Las Vegas shooting. He wasn't particularly, targeting individuals. He was just spraying. Even in the pole shooting in Orlando, the same thing. It's very easy. If you can point your finger, you can shoot a gun, basically. If you can point at a specific place, you can shoot a gun on target. The thing that's really true is that all these gun laws will only impact the people who follow them. So if it's tougher to get an AR-15, but it's not as tough to get a handgun, then they'll just go to a handgun, or they'll go to a knife. Now, something was said before about knife attacks are more than gun attacks. It's true, but it's not. Only as it relates to rifles is it true. It is not true for handguns. The handgun is pretty much the weapon of choice, so much more than the AR-15 in terms of gun violence. But the news media continually promotes this AR-15 as this weapon of evil. I do agree with Joseph. Guns don't fire by themselves. Now, Barry also has a point. If we reduce the availability of guns, maybe we can reduce it. However, most of your criminals don't buy guns through regular legal means. So the only people that would be reduced in terms of numbers of firearms are going to be people like me. Now, does that mean that everybody, because Ruth, you make a great point. Not everybody is trained to my level. I wouldn't want my cousin who's 95 years old to have a gun. Legally, he's allowed to, but I wouldn't like it. I don't think it's prudent. Most of your shootings either involve crimes of passion, or they involve some type of mental health, or they're targeted. For instance, the shooting that happened in Chicago just a few days ago, where the father and the daughter they were in the fast food line at McDonald's, and two thugs came up and started shooting in the car, killed the girl, the 7-year-old, and the father was wounded. The father was a thug, and he was targeted by 2 other thugs. So, the story gets bigger and bigger. Should George Floyd, should he have died? Absolutely not. But was he the hero that he's being made out to be, with Nancy Pelosi thanking God that he sacrificed himself? Come on. He didn't sacrifice himself. He was murdered. He didn't want to die for the good cause of gun control. Comments like that don't help the situation either. Barry's right. We do need programs. We do need action. But to target law-abiding citizens rather than increase penalties, including the death penalty, quicker, stop so many appeals, which I know Barry doesn't agree with because we've had that discussion before. We have to make it to the point where, and I'll use your own home as an example. If you make your home tougher to get into, there'll be no crime. It's a deterrent. If we make our gun laws tougher for the criminals rather than for the law-abiding citizen, maybe we can deter it. And maybe Turkey has the right answer. If your right hand offends you, off it goes. And I realize that's also a Jewish thing from the Bible. Barry's right. We're never going to get rid of mental illness. You can't. People have mental illness. But we have to have a way, and maybe it is Big Brother watching, that we can at least have some type of database that stops people like Cruz and like the guy from FedEx and others. And even that's not going to stop it too. The Sandy Hook shooting, the kid went to his grandmother's house and took her guns. He didn't even buy them. He just took somebody else's guns. So law-abiding citizens do have the right to protect themselves. They do. Do they need to be better trained to do it? I don't want a Don Knotts shaking his hand because he's too nervous. And everybody here should understand the reference to that. But I do, like I said before, I do agree with having a license to own a gun. I do agree with universal background checks and even more in-depth background checks than what they do now. Background checks, at a store, they get on the computer or they get on the phone, they contact the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, they run the name, date of birth. If there's nothing in the computer system, person's allowed to buy a gun. Doesn't make a difference whether he has some mental illness issues going on at the moment. If it's not in the system, he's allowed to buy a gun. In some states, and I believe Texas would be one of them, all you need is a driver's license, walk in the door, go buy it. There's a lot that can be done, and obviously a lot that should be done. But I don't agree with limiting law-abiding citizens of their right as given by the Second Amendment. And I'm actually teaching this I teach U.S. government. I'm teaching this right now. And it makes it, I'll be honest, it's very hard to teach this class because in full disclosure, I am a conservative. I am not a liberal. And to watch what's going on is very, very tough for me. Prior to January 6th and after January 6th.
So let me ask you something. So in response to what you said, right, so law-abiding citizens shouldn't be penalized for what the bad people are doing. So why didn't the law-abiding gun owners get after the NRA to let up and to get this stuff passed? It's up to the, if you're all NRA members, you're paying them to belong. So tell them what you all want. It seems to be throughout this country, there is a lot that gun owners would agree to, like you said. So why doesn't that happen?
Let me first say I'm not a member of the NRA.
Okay,
I am not.
Sorry,
Um,
but you know what I'm asking.
I do, and I do believe, without really looking into it by statistics, that membership in the NRA has decreased over the years, as a statement to some of the policies that the NRA has. Because in the world of the NRA, and Joseph, I believe, would agree with me, every man, every gun. Like Truman said, a chicken in every pot, or two chickens in every pot. The NRA, a gun in every house. That's their blinders. And there are a lot of people that just don't agree with that any longer. And I do see eventually the influence of the NRA truly being diminished, but it's going to take some time. They still have way too many members.
Okay, well, thank you.
Anybody else want to share some thoughts? Go ahead, Dr. Bolton.
David does.
He's muted.
Unmute yourself. David, unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
I have three thoughts, and the last one is a pretty novel partial solution for this complex problem. I do have something I haven't heard anyone speak about that is a partial, minuscule solution for the mass shootings, but I'll get to that last. The first thing, I got to call Barry on. I love Barry. He's very smart, bright, but he actually did what he accuses others of doing, of slurring with a broad brush unfairly. So when you said at one point, Barry, if any politician has ever taken money from NRA, don't vote for them. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, a politician can have 100 different policies and do good deeds. And if one of their donors is somebody, doesn't mean they're all about bad things. So that's an unfair statement, correct? I mean, you got to look at an individual person's policies, you know? If the NRA gave me money, I did something good, what's wrong with that? But anyway, that's just one comment. Number two, I just have to repeat what Sandy said. Obviously, the vast majority of gun owners do not do terrible things. And I'm not saying I have an easy answer for it, but just have to repeat that. The vast majority of people who own guns do not do terrible things. Okay, here's my novel answer, partial answer to these mass shootings. And I don't hear people say this often enough. So we have said, about holding people accountable. So I'll tell you something very interesting. If you all remember back in, I think it was the 70s, the ABC after school special, the Hallmark, they meant to have meaningful, psychologically valid shows, well-meaning intentioned shows. And they had shows against teen suicide. And they would show a teen, oh, no one will care if I'm gone. And they'd show the family and he'd kill himself. And then the family was very sad. And they were supposed to counter that the kids thought no one will care and it was wrong. Guess what? After these shows aired, the amount of suicides in America increased. Their well-intentions weren't borne out. No offense to Sandy, the DARE program. That, hey, we don't want cops just to be known for busting heads. So let's go into schools, drug abuse resistance education. We'll teach them about drugs. And for reasons I don't want to get into now, more kids exposed to the DARE program have a higher incidence of drug use after the fact. So as a scientist type person, you have to separate the intention from the actual result. The ABC after school specials cause bad results. So now in terms of accountability, here's what I say, the media. Okay, we all know when they're biased and saying incendiary things, political correctness, we've all talked, that's ridiculous. But guess what? Andy Warhol was right. Everyone wants their 15 minutes of fame. It wouldn't stop all shootings. But it is very clear, and it is my opinion, not so humble opinion, that these mass shootings, in most cases, are people getting their 15 minutes of fame. Hey, you know what? I'm going to take myself out. I'll be infamous. Dylan Klebold, and all that. People, if I'm going to die, people remember me through history. And I'm not saying every murder in America is based on this, but I think the mass shootings are largely with this factor, that instead of reporting the details, and I understand we all have a right to know news and all that, but you should just say some sick bastard killed 20 people and that's it. There are people who want to be infamous. And this is a novel thing, but I guarantee I'm correct, okay? It wouldn't eliminate all, but people want their infamy. And if you took that away, now in our society with free press, how would you enact that? It's about accountability. Free press, oh, we're doing a good thing, free press. Well, actually, you're not. The DARE program meant to be a good thing and it didn't work. The after school specials meant to have good intentions, didn't work. Free press is really great in a lot of ways and exposes corruption in our society. But when you make bastard people, and that's why I call them evil, infamous, the next bastard infamous person goes for it too. And I'll ask, I know I'm right on this. I know in some cases, and I think it's more prone to mass shootings than individual acts of passion, that these mass shootings, people want their infamy and they get it through the press. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me respond to Dr. Bolton. First of all, I agree with you about that. I think that's a very excellent suggestion, that the media shouldn't hype up all of these things and should ignore it or just report that it happened and not go into all the grisly details. I think that would be good.
Well, not give the person the name. The person wants to be famous. Don't say who did it.
No, I'm agreeing with you. As
Okay.
far as painting with a broad brush, the reason why the NRA is so powerful is because they have single issue voters in the NRA. And if somebody opposes them, they take them out. So what I'm suggesting is we do the same thing, but in reverse. If somebody's a member of the NRA, take them out. And yes, I would say if they're taking money from the NRA, take them out. Now, is it possible that somebody's taking money from the NRA and doing good things? I suppose you could look at that, and if they were doing all these great things and taking money from the NRA, then obviously you would take that into account. But in general, people who are on the payroll of the NRA are also climate deniers, and they're also doing a lot of other things that are really horrible. So I think we need to get tough with these people, and if they sold their soul to the devil, take them out. Another approach that I think would work is if you own a car, it's considered a dangerous instrumentality, and there's strict liability. If I have a car and I let somebody else use it, and somebody gets killed with my car, even though I had nothing to do with it, I'm responsible because I own it. I say do the same thing with guns. If somebody owns a gun, it has to be registered. And if somebody loses a life because of that gun, then you're responsible. I don't care if it's your kid who takes your gun, or oops, I left and somebody took it. Hold them accountable, and you will see the number of gun deaths go down significantly. Also, I'm glad that Sandy, I think he said he agrees about AR-15s or 14s or whatever they are.
AR-15.
I'm glad he believes that, but is he doing anything about it? Is he adding his voice to the call to get rid of these weapons? The problem is that the NRA and their ilk are saying that there shouldn't be anything done, and other people are wishy-washy on it and not doing anything. It's time. It's more than time for the Jewish people who are committed to peace, nonviolence, to Isaiah. It's time for us to say, no more weapons of war. I don't care what you call it. I don't care how you modify it. We got to get rid of them. And they did that in Australia, and it worked. When we had a weapons ban here for a while, it worked. It decreased the level. And to say, well, in Chicago, they have gun control and that didn't do anything. I can't even imagine somebody saying this with a straight face and making that as an argument. Obviously, if Chicago has tough laws, but in the next city over, there are no such laws, or you can get them in the next state, to suggest that that means here, see, gun control doesn't work, it's beneath you to make such a ridiculous argument. So I think we've discussed this quite a bit. I think it's been good. I just want to say this. Let's all get together and do away with these assault weapons. It seems like that's something we can agree on. And let's try to reduce the number of guns in America. And the more we reduce the number of guns in America, the more gun violence will be reduced. I want to thank everybody for participating. Great discussion. Thank you for running it, Sharon. And I'll see you next time at the next discussion, and check out our Shabbat celebration. We're also celebrating Earth Day. It should be a lot of fun. Shalom, Laila Tov.